te iwi and welcome to Inside Netball, a podcast dedicated to he kōrero poitara whiti, netball chat, both here in Aotearoa, New Zealand and around the world. Now again, here is my panel today, Sky Sport commentator Jenny Woods and former Silver Fern captain Adine Wilson. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Okay, so let's get into it, Wahinema. Again, the word physicality is coming up again, but it is important to talk about because A, it's really rough out there at the moment, and B, we need to hear and learn from all the, official viewpoints of the professionals in the league. So joining us now is Garratt Williamson. Garratt, can you please just quickly give us a brief introduction as to what it is you do with our officials in the game of netball?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a real privilege to be talking about the things that we do in the game. My title is National Technical Officials Manager, which is a long way of saying that I'm responsible for community and high performance umpiring. So from the moment a person picks up the whistle for the very first time to the time that we ship them off to a World Cup, that falls under the programs that I'm responsible for.
Yeah, the guy. He's the guy to talk to. All right.
Right, so we've got the right guy. So excellent. We're going to pummel you with questions now. So we have been talking about physicality. Has that been something that's been identified by the umpires that are increasing? And if yes, how would they like to respond to ensure that we all as a collective get on top of things?
Yeah, well, look, we noticed in the first two rounds that there were a couple of games that were quite willing. Not enough for us to think that it's different to any other given year. But what we did notice around about rounds 3 and 4 is that there was a lift in intensity in the games. The gut feel from our team was we needed to have a conversation about it, and we did. And I always like to try and put some evidence behind the gut feel to support what we're thinking. What we noticed around about round 3 was a lift in penalty counts in the game compared to a couple of years ago. There was more use of game management, and by game management I mean cautions and warnings. And basically, when you compare when we were delivering our cautions and warnings, this year we were delivering over 50% of them in the first half of games, compared to 30% in the first half of games 2 years ago. So what that was telling us was that we were going harder and earlier, and still not potentially getting a change in behaviour. So we met as a team, we talked it through. We went back to the teams who we've been working more closely with this year than any other year. And we said that to help the players gain absolute clarity on what was expected of them if we issued a caution or in particular a warning, we would convey the consequence after the warning. So over the last couple of rounds, you would have heard umpires say, player, that's a warning for whatever the offence is. The next time you do that, you'll be suspended. And of course, that culminated in a player being suspended in Wellington in round 5. And since then, we've seen a marked reduction in penalties in games, and game management, the cautions and warnings have started to plateau.
On the topic of cautions and warnings, there's a little bit of confusion as to when you are given the cautions and then it goes to a warning and then to suspension, because it seems like there was an incident with Temalisi who was cautioned for, it was either obstruction or contact, and then was warned for delaying play, and then was told if she got another call it would be suspension. Do you have to get cautions in the same offence before it's elevated to a warning, or is it very dependent on what the umpire is seeing out there?
Well, there's a number of ways in which the game management process can be applied. Cautions can be given for a number of offences, and you would have seen that just by watching netball. The rulebook says that a player cannot be cautioned twice for the same offence. The second must be escalated to a warning. But the rulebook strongly encourages umpires to escalate any second cautionable offence to a warning as well. And obviously, in that situation, the process would be caution, warning, suspension, order off. But it doesn't necessarily have to start at a caution. For example, dangerous play is a warning offence. And the rulebook's pretty clear on what applies in which situation.
Now, Garratt, you've also got a background in rugby. You're a referee yourself. And something I note in rugby is how much chat the referee has with players during the game. And in the game of netball, we see a lot of players during the quarter breaks coming and speaking with the umpires. But do the umpires have the ability to go and seek out a player or seek out a captain during a game and actually bring to their attention that, look, you've got a high penalty count, you need to tidy it up, or we are going to start dishing out cautions, for example.
Yeah, definitely. And you would have seen a couple of instances in ANZ Premiership this year where umpires have proactively gone to team captains and shared what they're thinking and the behaviour they believe needs changing. You talk about rugby. There's a lot of downtime in rugby, and the beauty of our game is that the ball's in play constantly, and it is more difficult to be able to do the things that, while you're waiting for a scrum to be set for a minute or a minute and a half to have a chat with some players. But the umpires do have the ability to, and are encouraged from time to time, to have an informal chat with a player on the run. It's harder to do because the game doesn't stop as much as some other sports, and it may be simple as goalkeeper get your distance as the running back for a centre pass or whatever.
One thing I've always wondered, and it's a thing you often hear called during a game, is who'd be an umpire? I mean, can I take you right back? Why do people do it? And I'd like to think, I hope there is some reasonable payment.
Well, it's a pretty cool way to be connected to the game. We're looking at community level to service the game and to provide a pathway for people who want to make it all the way to the top. And invariably, and what we've seen with our pathway over the last couple of years is we've got some really good people who've decided to make umpiring their thing. In terms of payments, not enough to leave your day job in New Zealand, but not insignificant. But yeah, so we've got a tiered system we use, and if you're good enough, you hang around, and like any sport, the benefits are a little bit greater.
And we're seeing now, again, I keep harking back to rugby. I must be watching too much. My husband's on it too much, my goodness. But we've seen a captain's call now in rugby. Would that be helpful in netball for the umpires from an umpiring perspective to be able to review something? And the second part of that question as well, how much at the moment is one umpire looking over to the other to get, I'm going to call it this way, or getting their second opinion? So there's probably two pieces to that question. Is a review any good, and how much do you look to both umpires to get a bit of feedback during when there is a really tough call, a critical call in a game?
Look, if I talk to the review question first, Adine, it's one of those things. Lots of sports have messed around with review systems, and they've found benefits from time to time, and they've found significant challenges around implementing that. So personally, and I don't want to speak on behalf of the business, anything that helps make sport better in some form of innovation is never a bad thing in my mind. In terms of how umpires communicate, they generally try and get on the same page. Most of our people have known each other for a wee while, and they know the cues. And of course, the umpires can appeal to each other if they think they need to seek clarity. And the phrase I always use with our team is, do we want to be right, or do we want to get it right? And what tools do we have at our disposal to be able to get it right?
Well, ka pai, Garratt, that's all the questions we've got for you today, but I think we can safely say that we think our game is in very capable and safe hands. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Okay, ladies, so let's get into our second topic today, and that is team selections with the little variant of, we have a lot of mamas coming into the season this year, and it's been beautiful to see that some of our players have either announced pregnancies or have become mums, but it can turn into a little bit of a selection. I don't want to say headache because I don't want to say it in a bad way, but it gives coaches something to think about in terms of their selections. And who better to let us know about those types of decisions to make than former Central Pulse coach Yvette McCausland-Durie. Kia ora, Yvette. Thank you so much for joining us. We just have a few questions for you today about this topic with your professional expertise on the matter. But first, what we want to talk about is what time in the season do you start planning technically for the season to come?
I was generally planning at the start of the season we were in. So we were already, once it had started, regardless of results, starting to have conversations. And that's largely around painting a picture of a 3-year plan rather than just trying to deal with 1 year at a time. So I would generally start that conversation with people and allow them to then come back to us. So I guess it just depends. If you're thinking of recruiting, which wasn't really part of my mindset, I was always thinking about retention. first and foremost. So my job was always about how do I keep the people that I've got and take care of them.
Yvette, not all pregnancies are planned. So what kicks in when someone comes to you and says, I'm pregnant?
So under the New Zealand Netball Players Association collective agreement between Netball New Zealand and the players for the ANZ Premiership, it's stated really clearly what's available to them as a player that's pregnant and how long they'll get paid leave for. So those are kind of the mechanics, but aside of that, the big one's working with them to say, is this, you want to come back to the game? Is this final for you? Do you want to still remain with the team and have a role to play during that period? Or, you know, they might not be well and they don't know. If it's their first pregnancy, they don't know how they're going to feel. And so providing a space for them to think about what contribution they'd like to make and still including them, particularly if they want to do that and if they want to continue into the following year, allowing them to still have a level of engagement.
And of course, Yvette, with every franchise, a lot of it has to do with the financial decisions that are behind it. So how do you go about distributing those finances with replacement players?
Yeah, it's costly. So certainly you are committed to paying their leave and you need to find another player. So you do need, and that's got a set amount that must be paid based on the minimum scale in the ANZ Premiership. So again, that's all driven by the New Zealand Netball Players Association contract and the collective agreement, and it's already clearly laid out. So from a CEO and a coach perspective, you'll go back and have a look at who are some other people in that position, what will that do in terms of, do you need somebody with a leadership perspective? It's not necessarily just a player you're putting in, what are the other roles that they play? So understanding what gap they've left.
And how do you think New Zealand teams have handled it? I mean, gosh, there are some teams that could just about set up their own creche. You know, the number of players with one child, I should say. Amaru Tibble with 2, Anna Harrison with 3. Do you think it's gone well in this country?
Yeah, I think so. I think Netball New Zealand have been very supportive. I can remember certainly in the Commonwealth Games period, Amelia Rand was coming back from having Ocean at that time, and a huge amount of support was put in place as to how could family be involved. There's all sorts of accreditation when it's not your event, when you go to that international level outside of your own sport. There's a lot of accreditation and there's only so many people allowed in a village at different times. So there was a lot of work done around that space. I think it's quite challenging for young women when they do become pregnant, because mostly it's just really exciting and they want to be able to share it, but because it's their work and they are so public in terms of who they are, they have to really manage how they share that news. And so sometimes it's actually quite a stressful time for them, because they've got to get the layer of, right, I've got to tell this person first and I can't get to that person. And it almost feels a bit like a secret, which is a little bit of a shame for them, because it's a really special time, but it has to be managed really well. So I think there's lots of support that we all understand that in a women's sport, this is going to happen.
Kia ora, Yvette, for your time, and of course, Wahinema, she gave us all the expertise that we wanted to hear on that topic. It is a very sensitive one, and, you know, there was a time where squads were selected in 12s, and now they're down to 10. So, you know, how does that kind of affect the team as well?
Yeah, so that changed when we got rid of the Trans-Tasman competition and went into just the ANZ Premiership. So teams used to have to pick 12 in their squads, and what used to happen was 2 or 3 of those players potentially sat on that bench. They didn't get an opportunity on court at all, yet all of the expenses still went with flying the players around the country, with you know, putting them up in hotels, and they weren't getting the opportunity on court. That changed when it came to the ANZ. Now you have to pick a minimum of 10 in a squad. You can pick up to 12, but what most people do now is choose 10 in their squad and 2 as training partners. And that, I think, has had some real advantages, because if you do have an unplanned pregnancy all of a sudden, or maybe a planned one that just popped up and surprised a coach, you can then either pull those training partners up to make them permanent players, or you can actually start looking around a little bit more and look at potentially some of the training partners from other squads, because we have seen in this competition already Tori Colossi. She was with the Stars as a training partner. She then came into the Magic side. And there's another example of Ivana Rowland.
Ivana Rowland, that's right, coming into the the pulse for Amelia Ignacio. So,
you know, we're mothers sitting at this table, and this is a part of life. And when you're in an environment where it's, you know, it is all women, this is going to happen. You know, a lot of our players start out at these, you know, young, aspiring, you know, players of the future, and then they do get to a time in their lives where obviously they do want to, you know, have families. Adine, you're a prime example of that.
Yes, I think I might have been 15 weeks pregnant playing in a World Cup.
Hey, we're talking about mums, and, you know, the team that has really, you know, Amelia Ignacio, Katrina Rori, announcing pregnancies, becoming mama. Let's take a look at the pulse, because they are obviously, you know, a franchise right now as a direct result of, you know, these conversations. So how have we made, they're our team in the spotlight this week, how have we made of the pulse? They've, you know, they're showing signs of, you know, rising up through the ranks so far.
well, their win the other night over the Stars was very, very good, and I think very, very unexpected. I don't know that many people saw that coming, but I think it was perhaps an example of a team that suddenly found itself gelling at just the right time. And there were a few players who have been, you know, I think of Maddie Gordon, who was attracting a lot of whistles. She was getting a little bit of criticism, perhaps from this podcast, and she was outstanding, and she was talking during the week about how hard it was to learn that wing defence position, and she nailed it. And of course, one of the other great players, Kalira Nawai, this goalkeeper from Fiji, who is a great story, and a mother. She's got a 3-year-old boy who, you know, came down to New Zealand to go to school in Christchurch, then I think had a few visa issues, had to go home, got married, had the child back there, and then went to the World Cup for Fiji, and is now living in Methven, I think, but playing for the Pulse. And actually, as a result of that, I found out where Methven was, because I mistakenly thought
you and I both, Jen.
Well, I thought it was all about the taps in Dunedin, but nothing to do with Methven tapware. It was, anyway, that's a whole other story.
More about the skiing.
Well, yes,
to Mount Hutt.
very near Mount Hutt. But she was outstanding. I think 5 intercepts in that win over the Stars.
And the other one, and in fact she was Player of the Day, and Kalira went very close to Player of the Day, Te Amo Amaru Tibble. Wow, you know, she was expecting to come into the season to play the odd quarter here or there. She is now the starting goal attack, and she stood up beautifully. She didn't even really know Alia Dunn. This is quite new to each other. I mean, Te Amo hadn't been playing since 2017 at this level, and to step back into the role that she's been playing is fabulous. And the two of them, they just, you know, Alia and Te Amo, they look so relaxed out there. They just don't let anything sort of faze them, and I think that's standing them in good stead. So yes, they're still at that bottom of the table with the Magic, and in fact coming up is going to be the bottom of the table clash between the two teams in round 7. But I don't know, I do feel like the Pulse are turning a corner. Gail Parata, she's stuck with that 7 a lot of this time. She hasn't made a lot of changes. She's almost given them time to gel, and you're also seeing Kelly Jury also getting used to that goal defence position. So I won't be surprised if the Pulse start really moving up the table now that they're sorting to find that gel, those links together, and especially if the players like Kalira and Te Amo keep stepping up.
So off the back of that, you know, we talk about, well, we're kind of talking about key players and teams, and we've mentioned the likes of Amelia Ignacio and the Pulse missing. We've had this kōrero before about when Grace Carroll was injured for the Magic and Te Paesabi Rickett was out for the Tactics. If we look at all our teams now, do you think there is a key person in each of the teams, if you were to pluck them out, that they would make significant, you know, difference or disruption perhaps in our ANZ Premiership teams?
Oh, you're dying to start, Jen.
Well, I am going to start because I love this player, and she, I think, is the smallest in the league. And of course, I'm talking about Peta Toiava, because she is just this little rocket that you get the feeling absolutely runs that, you know, the front attack for the Mystics. And I think, you know, if something happened to her, it would absolutely stymie that attack end. And you can see, I mean, was it Bailey Mez on Netball Zone saying that, you know, when things get tough, who is it that, you know, like extra time the other night, who is it that's talking to you, leading you, guiding you? Peta Toiava. And for me, for the Mystics, she would be a key player that you would not want to lose.
I would counter that, because she's got to have someone to throw it to. And she's got to throw it to Grace Nweke, who's shooting 50-something shots a match. She didn't in this last one actually, but they still got the win. But so I would counter that with Grace Nweke. But then if we looked at the stars, my argument, and I think we're going to disagree on this as well, I would stick with the shooters and go Maya Wilson. Maya Wilson, take her out of the mix. She's such a she's a foundation player for the Stars.
There's always someone else who can shoot a goal or two. My argument would be you cannot do without Anna Harrison, and we saw that. We saw evidence of that in this round 6, where she went off. I think the score was 18 all. She came back, and it wasn't much different, but so much momentum had been lost. And I think is that Keystone? They're Keystone players who have that power to just inspire the rest of them. And I think Harrison.
There's a lot of them in the Stars. Like, I think right now, if you were to look at Gina Crampton and take her out of,
how did we forget about
the
Gina?
speed of that attack, how would they fare?
I wonder if that's what happened, though, in round 6. Maddie Gordon got her,
True.
Clamped her down. But now what about the steal? Who would you take out of the steal?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I'd have to go their import, Fisher. And
so you're sticking with the shooters. You're sticking with the shooters. I'm sticking with the feeders. Shannon Saunders.
Yeah.
I mean, gee whiz, that's how many? 88 tests? 80 tests. Most tests at the moment anyway of any player going around. You can't replace that sort of head. So, again, I'll go with Saunders.
I think I stick with the shooters, because no matter how good you're doing up court, if the ball doesn't go through the hoop, you can't score.
Yeah.
So important to have those shooters, and that's why I've gone Fisher again. I should be going for my fellow middies. But interesting, we've only gone for one defence so far.
Well, that's right. Which, when there's the old saying, isn't it? Defence wins games, but perhaps not.
Let's have a look at the Magic. Would you pick a defender out of the Magic?
Ooh.
I did mention Grace Carra, but would she be the pivotal one?
Well, you could see this past round 6, the difference that McCausland made when she got up and over with the big 3-foot guard. That was certainly, she's important in that Magic lineup. Well, they all are, aren't they? But it's hard to know. I mean, they made a lot of changes in the back end of that game, but we sort of don't want to get into that discussion. But they looked as though they were going to do it, and then they didn't.
Yeah, and I'd probably look at it more from a leadership perspective when it comes to the Magic. Yes, Grace was an obvious one as well, but Sam Winders, she is the machine behind that team. She's driving them. The energy she's bringing to trying to lift them and bring them along. I think if you lost someone like Winders for the Magic, that would be... I hope we're not jinxing anyone while we're doing this.
Well, I thought we were playing favourites, and now we could be jinxing.
Yes, the coaches will be going home and wrapping these players in cotton wool and telling them not to go out now. That's
right. Well, so we're agreeing on Sam Winders for Magic. When we go down to the tactics, of course, we spoke about when Te Paia Sabi-Rickett came out, they struggled in attack. But I was watching Kimi Orapoi over the weekend. Gee whiz, she's getting faster and faster. Her defensive game in the middle, outstanding. I don't know what they would do if she dropped out.
Yes, that's right. I also like the look of now Jane Watson, which will be perhaps a little bit controversial, because I think she's had quite a quiet start to the season. But I remember this is something Casey Korpua used to do. You'd look at her at the beginning of the year and think, perhaps not in top stride yet, but she would slowly work her way up into just fabulous form. And I just wonder if Watson's doing a little bit of that now.
Have we just picked our Silver Fern team halfway through the ANZ? We've taken out the key players from each team. We hit halfway, right? Next week, round 7, we're halfway through. So I feel like we almost just picked the Silver Fern team. I hope Knowles was listening. Give it a little bit of advice. But yeah, certainly some
Prove us
key
right,
players.
Well, I wonder, are they, how closely we saw Deb was at the Magic game over the weekend. So I wonder how closely they are looking seriously at who's going to be in that lot.
Oh, I'd say they are watching every player very, very closely, and they'll have spies all over the country. Well, not just spies, but selectors. So, yes, I don't think there's, anywhere to escape really for these players who want to get in that black dress.
And with the bubble open now to Australia, fingers and toes and everything crossed that we get to see a few more of those great contests later in the year. The Constellation Cup, always love it. So fingers crossed. Bubble, stay open, please.
Yes, please, bubble, don't pop. Okay. Wahinema, thank you so much for joining me again today. Some intriguing conversation, and we were able to have some guests in the in the screen as well. So thanks a lot, and we'll be obviously looking for next round and what it could bring.
Good times. Thanks, Rev.
so much.
And thank you for joining us at home. Remember, if you have any comments or any opinions, or do you agree or disagree with what happened on our show today, let us know by dropping a comment below. We'll see you next week. Mā te wā.